What's good, YouTube? Let's get into it real quick. Today, we're going to be talking about COGS. COGS. This is another episode of Investing Explained. Now, this is something, if you've ever looked over any financials, any 10Qs, not 10Qs, 10Ks, or 10Qs, you will have probably seen COGS. COGS is a very important metric, a very important thing to know how to decipher it, what all goes into it, because it leads to other things like gross profit, gross margin. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But COGS, what does COGS stand for? COGS stand for cost of goods sold. That's what COGS stands for. What is the formula to find COGS? The formula is beginning inventory plus any products you purchase during that quarter, during that period, during that year, and you subtract that from ending inventory, and that will give you COGS. Now, for this example, we're going to say you own a clothing brand. We're going to say you own a clothing brand, and your clothing brand generated total revenue of $100,000. Total revenue is $100,000 for your clothing brand. Generated 100K. That was your total revenue. Now, let's say we had to spend, let's say we spent from this 100K, we spent 20K on fabrics. We spent another 20K on our manufacturers to make the clothes. And we spent another 20K on packaging for our clothes. All of these things would fall under COGS, cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold are any direct cost associated with producing your product. Any direct cost associated with your production would fall under COGS. Now, what doesn't fall under COGS? Remember, we're a clothing brand. What doesn't fall under COGS are things like post-production cost, like maybe influencer marketing. So paying influencers to wear our clothes after the clothes are made would not be cost of goods sold. The actual cost of shipping the products after they are made, it does not fall under cost of goods sold. These are not costs directly associated with the production of our clothes. You see what I'm saying? Now, let's stick to this example. So, we've seen that our total revenue was $100,000. See what I'm saying? We spent $100,000. We made $100,000, and we spent 20K on fabrics, 20K on manufacturers, 20K on packaging. So that gives us a COGS of what? 60K. Now, that gives us a COGS of 60K. Now that we have our COGS of 60K, what else can we find with this? So we know our cost of goods sold was cost us $60,000 from a total revenue of 100K. Now, remember we talked about other things we can find. Let's find our gross profit. Gross profit. So how do we find that? Well, we take our total revenue of 100K and we subtract that from our cost of goods sold, which was 60K, and that gives us a gross profit of 40K. That gives us a gross profit of 40K. Now, how do we find our gross margin? Well, now that we have our gross profit, we're going to take our gross profit of 40K, and then we're going to divide that by our total revenue of 100K. That's going to give us 0.4. Then we're going to multiply that 0.4 times 100, and that's going to give us 40%, which means our gross margin is 40%. So these are the type of things that you can find, once you know what your COGS is as a business. And these are things that you should be looking at when you're looking at your companies, because you don't want to just look at that shiny number. Okay, we made 100K. We made 100K this year. And just take that number for face value. We want to know, and this is just cost of goods sold. We haven't even got into expenses and taxes and all of that stuff. So you see how much this number shrunk just with getting rid of that cost of goods sold. Now, you see we had a gross profit of 40K. Gross margin 40%. So that means we're only keeping 40% of our total revenue after we subtract cost of goods sold. That's not the greatest. If we were investing, if we were going to be investing in a company, we want that gross margin to be higher. We want that gross margin to be as high as possible, or at the least, we would want to see those gross margins increase over time. Now, let's get into a quick little, this or that. We're going to do company A, company B. You tell me which one you're going to be investing in from the information that we just went over. So we got company A, we got company B over here. Total revenue, 100K, just like we just talked about. Total revenue of 100K, total revenue of 100K. This clothing brand called, they're doing all right. They doing all right. They're doing okay. That cost of goods sold is only 40K. This company over here, they're extremely efficient, which is what we want to see, being able to produce whatever product you sell. We want you to get to a point to where you can produce that product, for as little as possible. We want you to be able to produce that product for cheap so that you can increase the profit margins, so that you can increase the profits. And we want to see those numbers go up. So the company B, their cost of goods sold is only 20K. 20K, they got a good manufacturer, man. They're getting their fabrics for cheap, their packaging for cheap. They've cracked the code. They're able to bring that cost of goods down, and let's see how that affects the gross profit and the gross margin. So when we go to gross profit over here, 100K, total revenue minus that cost of goods sold gives them a gross profit of 60K. Come over here, 100K total revenue, their cost of goods only 20K. That gives them a gross profit for 80,000. And then we come to gross margins. You remember that formula? You remember that? Gross margins. We're going to take that gross profit, 60K, divide that by total revenue, 100K. Then we're going to multiply that by 100, and that will give us a 60% gross margin. On this side, do the same thing. It will give us a 80% gross margin. Which company, which company are you investing in? Which company are you investing in? Which company is more efficient? Which company, you know, has increased the gross profits? Which company has better margins? I think you should all be able to see that company B is the better choice. Even though, and this is why you need to know about, things like cost of goods sold and other things that we've covered and things that we will cover. Because when you're investing, you don't just want to see the big flashy number and be led astray. We want to deep dive into the financials and know what we're looking at. We want to know what we're looking at. So if you see both of these companies, the total revenue is the same. Total revenue is the same. So you may see that and say, okay, these companies are even. These companies are on par. But no, that's not the true story. You get into that cost of goods sold. You see this company, it costs them double what it costs this company to produce the product. And in this example, they're clothes. So it's costing it's costing company A double what it costs company B to produce the clothes. And then you see that start to show up in the gross profits, 60K. They're making a whole $20,000 more, and you see it show up in the gross margins. Their gross margins are much better at 80%. So that's why you want to be paying attention and knowing what goes in the cost of goods sold, because it's going to help you also with gross profit and gross margin. And we kind of jumped into three other metrics a little bit, going over cost of goods sold. But it's good that you guys get to see this anyway, so that way we're going to be talking about a lot of earnings coming up. We're going to be talking about a lot of earnings coming up. Cost of goods sold is something that's going to come up, so I want you guys to know, what is cost of goods sold, what are gross profits, what are gross margins, and we're going to be going over a lot of other things. But that's it for today's episode of Investing Explained, Cost of Goods Sold. Please like, share, and subscribe, man. If I brought you any value, if you learned anything from this video. And one more thing, every company is not going to have a cost of goods sold. Every company won't have a cost of goods sold because every company, doesn't necessarily make a tangible product. So keep that in mind. But I see you on the next video. Thank you for tuning in with your boy.